speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is someone who I have known for over 20 years, which is really funny when you think about it, because neither one of us have aged a day. But she is a local attorney here in Birmingham, and she has, for the last several years, been voted one of the best young attorneys in our area. So she's here to share a what I find very moving and a very personal story. So please welcome Ms. Heather Fan up here.
I feel like this story is cheating on distance. We'll just get over that part, I guess. Because Brad suggested it, it's his fault.
Good story.
As a young person, I related to The Little Mermaid. I longed to live out of the waters of my small hometown of Piedmont, Alabama. You don't know it, right? Yeah. Jackson State. Anniston area, halfway between here and Atlanta. I've had this conversation a time or two. So after attending governor school at Samford University in high school and falling in love with its quiet, cozy campus, and upon the beginning of my hope-abundant freshman year of college, I happily made myself a 90-minute tape of music to drive by. That exists, didn't it? There we go. If you didn't believe the 20-year thing. Labeled it To Birmingham and Back, and sang about being ready to know what the people know, and raised on promises between what was now my campus and what had been home for the better part of my life. The trips grew fewer and further between, as they do. The place didn't change and the path remains the same, but the definition of the word home certainly shifted with each play of that tape, and eventually the soundtrack changed too. The other thing Little Mermaid and I had in common was sisters. By the time I left for college, there were 4 of us, 3 from Daddy's Phase 1, and a 3-year-old stepsister. The next summer would bring our 5th, Laura, whom I proudly paraded around town back home to find folks often mistaking me for her mother. I was technically old enough, and she certainly had similar features, but I was traveling a different path than my high school friends who had started having their own children on that A side of my travel tape. I took Laura places and fussed over her and took a roll of film every time we spent a weekend together. Being a much bigger sister was certainly enough for the moment. Laura just herself left the nest. Jacksonville State. If she knew what a tape was, she'd know hers wouldn't need quite so many girl power songs as mine to fill the miles. Unlike The Little Mermaid, I was oldest, most structured. I'm not yet 40, but I felt I was going on that age from 19 or so when Laura was born. Had a bit of history of being bossy, accustomed to having an innate certainty of the best interests of those around me, and rounding them up to ensure they followed my plan towards goals they didn't know they should be striving to achieve. I stuck to my own clear path as well. Wrote in my poetry classes about longing for a baby too early and how hens must feel about wasted eggs. Got a teaching degree and tortured teenagers into very nearly admitting they enjoyed Romeo and Juliet. Searched their eyes for that more wanting Ariel and I felt bursting from our chests at that age. Jumped ship early for law school such that I now parent adults through their divorces. In between all that, I got married. In attendance at my wedding was my first nephew, only a month old at the time. Being the supplier to the family of the first grandchild / niece or nephew was a position it hadn't occurred to me to covet until I lost it. My sister Teresa had usurped it, which seemed unfair since I had checked off everything in the right order so far. Undergraduate degree, graduate degree, engagement, job, big wedding at First Baptist Piedmont. Teresa is the middle sister of Phase 1, but somehow manages to do middle sister so well as to remain that even among the whole 5. I figured I'd end up raising that sweet boy. I made many trips down I-20 and back to get him for weekends. I ate him up. When his sister came a couple of years later, I'd get them both. They loved my husband. We enjoyed our weekends together. I took lots of digital photos. I still longed for a child of my own. It turned out my husband did not want to give me. There was a fight about adoption after a year of what folks around here will call trying. And then, quite suddenly, it seemed there was no husband. I supplied the family. Its second divorce, a year before I started doling them out in my career. By the time Carolyn, phase one's baby, called to say she was pregnant, there was no point of pride left to be lost. Only a sharp tinge of jealousy, striking a bit deeper than expected. But Carolyn looks like me. We think alike. She'd checked off important points before this one, as I had tried to do. I discovered to my quite pleasant surprise at some point as an adult that she was, in fact, my best friend. Her baby seemed even more like he was sort of mine than Teresa's had. And a couple of years later, I found myself still single when she was ready to announce her second. Teresa had middle-childed herself out of most family events, having left her children to live with their father, but we began to alternate picking them up for what their mother was now missing, which we still do. I loved each of my sister's children so much, and yet with the coming of each, the idea of my ever traveling that path home to announce that I was finally starting my own family seemed to grow further away from my fingertips. Jealousy began to give way to grief. My father is a city manager. He's fond of telling men of high position with whom he does business that, quote, "You can't scare me. I have 5 daughters." Carolyn's second child afforded us an opportunity to introduce a game. Guess which one of us is pregnant? It is a cruel one, of course. When this fourth grandchild was on his way, Laura was 15, Hannah 19. We hadn't seen Teresa much lately. He did have to think, though his answer was swift. "It better be one of you two," he said, pointing to me and Carolyn as we were seated in the floor. Of course, the game wouldn't have ended so joyously if he hadn't been right. Nor would I have begun, quite frankly. I don't remember what songs I played on my ride between homes last summer, the last time we played the game. But we lined up again, now presenting more of a challenge. Laura, 18, and preparing to move in with her boyfriend to start college, over Daddy's Triton objections. Hannah, 22, whose boyfriend already had an older child she was pretty much raising as her own, and who'd been battling what folks around here call female troubles. Carolyn, 31, generally overwhelmed with 2 wild boys of her own. A 34-year-old Teresa who had not visited with her own children in at least a year. And me, 37, nearly 20 years after writing poems about the ache the babies in Sears flyers inspired in my ovaries, having recently been told by a doctor that they wouldn't fill. And dating a man with 2 children who had no plans for any more of his own. This time, after forcing Laura to sit down, and no doubt heaving an internal sigh of relief when she did, he guessed wrong before telling me something I'm pretty sure is true. But I earned it. I didn't take Tate to the hospital this past Monday night when Carolyn had her third. A very little girl named Corianne that looks nothing like her, though I'm confident she'll be all the blessing that youngest girl has been to my own mother and her mother before her. My son recently started daycare, and I didn't want to risk him bringing his first cold to the new baby. My father and grandmother fussed at me the most about his absence. Neither he nor I have made it home as often as their tastes would prefer. I missed my own baby as I held this one until an hour past his bedtime, then took the ramp to I-20 to return to my other home. After stopping by the law office, where I am now partner, to gather my file for the next morning's trial, and peeked in on my sweet child, the 5th of 6 grandchildren, sleeping soundly, though with a bit more of a snore than usual. I went to bed awfully tired, but feeling a little bit like the girl who has everything.